Amen. Dr. Macintosh, will you come up, please? Would you join me in giving a hearty Texas welcome to Dr. Macintosh? Thank you, my friend. Please, here, you sit this side, I'll sit this side, because you're from England, so you're probably left of me.
I was going to say it was very nice to hear some English a minute ago.
All right, if we can mic him up just a little bit, because I tend to shout, and then and he's a little more soft-spoken, and that would be great. Dr. Macintosh is a professor emeritus, I guess, of Hebrew from Cambridge University. Now, Pastor David Fleming and I were in Cambridge about 4, 5, 6 years ago. I don't remember exactly. And we made a run over to Peter Williams' Hebrew class that he was teaching there. And we sat through one of his classes. It was good. And ever since then, Dr. Fleming has told everyone that he meets that he studied Hebrew at Cambridge. Which is true. But I'm going to tell you that Dr. Macintosh taught Peter Williams Hebrew at Cambridge. So now you're going to be able to say, you studied Hebrew under Peter Williams, professor at Cambridge, Dr. Andrew Macintosh. Good? Are you ready? All right, that's what we're going to do today. Dr. Macintosh, I would like to start out by just the class getting to know you a little bit. So tell them a little bit about who you are.
I've always wondered. No, the truth is, I was born, as Mark normally tells people. He says he won't tell people's ages, but then he tells them the date. I was born right at the end of 1936, and my first memories were of 1940, when I was about 4 or 5, and I was bombed by the man with the moustache from Germany. And he sent his bombers over where I lived on the south coast, 20 miles away from occupied Europe. And his bombers went over and bombed London. And when they finished that, they turned around and went back to France, where they were. And any bombs they still got left, they let off on the town that I lived in. So my house was bombed all around it. I lost little friends and so forth, blown to smithereens. The windows of my house were blown in 10 times in a year from bombs all around, and red-hot shrapnel in the ceiling. So those are my war stories. But what is important is that my father was an Anglican priest, and he always used to go off on his motorbike while the bombs were still falling and take comfort to the dying and the injured. So that was the moment where I felt the call from the Lord to be a priest. That's perhaps the most important thing. The rest, as they say, is history.
When I first heard this story from Dr. Mack, he told me, he said, you know, I like to think that Hitler is in hell, very upset that because of him I became a priest. And it's been a personal mission to make his awareness miserable. You have a lovely wife.
Yep.
You have 3 children.
Yeah, 3 homemade.
3 homemade children. Because you and your wife took care of how many foster children?
About 98.
98.
Hence the wreck you see before you.
How did you become, those of you who don't know, I am not mincing words when I say that we have here one of the preeminent Hebrew scholars in Christianity, without a doubt, out of the 8 billion people on this earth. How did you first get into Hebrew? How did you decide this was something worth studying?
Well, I wished to be ordained, as I've explained, and I went to Cambridge University and to St. John's College. And when I got there and I'd unpacked, I went to see my tutor. And my tutor said, right, you will be starting Hebrew on Monday morning. And so I said, no, I can't, I shan't, and I won't. I'm writing to my MP about this. I don't think I like this at all. But I was forced to do it. And I never looked back. The moral of that, some young people need to be forced to do certain subjects because they don't know what's there if they aren't forced to do it.
That was the same argument my mother used to make me try liver and onions. And I have not eaten them again since because they were horrible. But Hebrew is another subject. When did you realize you were gifted at this, that this was in your wheelhouse?
Well, in the end of my first year, I got, you may know that in Oxford and Cambridge we divide up the results of the exams by first, 2-1, 2-2, and 3, and Oxford, being Oxford, have a number 4, which is the worst of all.
You don't even accept those students at Cambridge. Understand. Go ahead.
But I must tell you, before I tell you, well, I scored at the end of my first year, in Hebrew, I scored a number 1 at first, so that was why. I was good at it, and we like studying what we're good at.
Okay.
And I must tell you all that the category 2-2 is always called, by people who get it, you say, what did you get in the exams? And they always say, Desmond. Desmond 2-2.
That's pretty good. Yes. Well, now, within the world of Hebrew studies, you started out as the chaplain at Cambridge, and you became a tutor, and an assistant dean, and then a dean, and then a president. It might be worth everyone hearing. We all know about the dean at a college, right? Okay, I love this story. Tell them where it came from.
Well, Mark was for once puzzled by something. And he was puzzled because he'd been to Canterbury Cathedral and he'd seen evidence that the Archbishop was not the boss of Canterbury Cathedral. And he was quite right, because the old English way of a cathedral church is a church where a bishop is stationed. But the bishop is not the boss of a cathedral, a dean is. So the boss of a cathedral is the dean, and the bishop must be very polite to the dean, which is very good for them. Now, dean is from Latin decanus. Decanus in the monasteries was a monk in charge of 10 monks. So the word dean is a compressed English version of the Latin decanus. And because the universities of Oxford and Cambridge were founded by the church and followed monastic principles, those monks who were in charge, or those officers in the college who were in charge of discipline and of worship, were called decani, deans. And from Oxford and Cambridge, in the English-speaking world, the word dean then moved off and lost its dog collar and became a title associated with universities. But its origins are church ones.
Is that not pretty cool? Okay, I really like that. All right, now we're going to shift gears for a moment, but we're going to shift gears by doing it this way. You've written a number of Old Testament commentaries.
One.
One is a number. Whew, had to go lawyer on me for a minute, didn't he? You wrote one on Hosea? Hosea. Okay. And then okay, that's fair. Now, why did you write a commentary on Hosea?
Because he I was fascinated that he had woman trouble.
Well, I'm glad you went to Hosea instead of the Song of Solomon.
Oh, but I did. Because the prophecies of Hosea, if they hadn't existed, I'm sure that the Song of Songs would not have got into the canon of the Bible. Because Hosea believed and loved his wife enormously, and she was a naughty girl and went off with other people, but he never gave up on her. He stood by her and eventually won her back. And that's a wonderful story, I think. And Hosea, who you can't tell the difference between what God thinks and what Hosea thinks. He thinks that Israel is the wife of God, and that Israel, in its idolatry, is doing exactly what happened between his wife and himself. And he knows that God, like him, stayed by his country, although they played him false. And he then speaks, as prophets do, of the wonderful time in the future when he will be reunited with his wife, and when Israel will be led once again into the wilderness to find her great love, and a honeymoon in the wilderness with her husband, God. And the language of that betrothal in the desert is very strong indeed, very strong. He's got Adaber al-Libba. I'm going to speak to her heart. I'm going to chat her up, as we say in English. God's going to chat up his bride in the desert and make her his. All that as background. Now then, that we have the Song of Songs. Yishakeni minashikot pihu ki dovim dodechami yain. Passionate, very passionate. Let him kiss me, which he says, with his mouthy kisses, because your love is better than wine. Now, on it goes in this very, very intense way. And the rabbis all said, you mustn't sing these beautiful love songs in the pubs because they're too holy to sing in the pubs. Now, why did they say they were too holy? Because the rabbis all said the real point of the Song of Songs is not Solomon and his girlfriends, it's God and his great girlfriend Israel. And every word is an expression of God's love. And it's very, I like to say, as a Brit, this is all just a bit sort of, makes you a bit uncomfortable. Sort of warm Mediterranean people may think like that. But we Brits with our stiff upper lips, I think it's going a bit far. But you started, Mark, I blame Mark, he started me on this. I think it's the most wonderful thing. When I was a young man, of course, the rabbis, they really think it's about God's love for Israel. No, it's all about sex, isn't it? That's what I said as a young man. But I'm an old man now, and I know better. And I think it's a most wonderful story, and it's a story which we're a little reluctant to talk about because it sails along, it sails close to the wind, but it's great, and there were. Sorry, I must stop. But there were saints in the Catholic mystics tradition who were not ashamed to talk of the love of God for their souls in very strong terms like that. No. And don't forget Hagios Pavlos, our old friend St. Paul. He talked about the church as the bride of Christ. So he's in the same tradition.
Amen. So within the framework of your studies, but by the way, before we leave it, Hosea, what did his name mean?
Well, it's really the same as Jesus. It's salvation. It's just another form of it.
Another form of Jesus.
You know, we all know it as Hoshiana. Hosanna. Mm-hmm. Hoshiana, when they shouted out on Palm Sunday, Hoshiana. That's our name. Yeah. Hosanna in the highest. And it means salvation.
Okay. So now, somewhere in the midst of this, you were asked to be a part of a select group of 8 people to translate the Psalms anew back in 1970.
Yeah.
And some who were in attendance last night heard some of this, but many of the people who are here did not. And this is, right now, I did not tell you this. This is going live on the internet right now. Do we have your permission?
You won't see my heels for a minute when I run away.
No. You're good. But yes. So I think it might be useful for them to get a little bit of background. Yeah. So you were asked to be one of 8 people to translate the Psalms into modern English. Yeah. Fair?
Yeah.
And can you just explain briefly why that was an issue, and then we'll look at some Psalms.
Well, because the churches in England were atrophying in some ways because people no longer understood the language in which we received the Psalms, which was in a version by a man called Miles Coverdale in 1536. He translated the Psalms from Latin in 1536, and his version has run for 500 years in England, and it's still in use in the big choir, in the choirs where they're a cappella choirs, in the cathedrals and the big colleges of Oxford and Cambridge. They still sing the Coverdale version. But it's very old-fashioned English, and people in the ordinary working parishes couldn't really get their heads around this old English. So we needed to have a modern version. And at the same time, we had advanced considerably in research into the meaning of ancient Hebrew. And so we combined the two to do this in a modern language version and right up to date Hebrew.
Okay, so the Coverdale version in 1536, if we can, we've got it on the screen there. You can sort of see it there, but if you read upside down, don't you? Since you read left, right?
I'm all right after midday.
Okay. So Coverdale in 1536, Coverdale based his translation on what text?
That's a complicated one. A Latin text. The Latin text was a translation of the Greek text. And the Greek text was the translation of the Hebrew text. So Coverdale's Psalms are a great grandson of the original. Hebrew, translated into Greek, translated into Latin, translated into English. And if you ever played the game when you were children of Whispers, you make a line and you put in a little message at one end of the line and see what comes out the other end. Just think of that. Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English. There are a lot of funny things that turned up in the whispering.
And so when you did the new translation, by the way, just so that we know, we often think of the 1611 King James as the version that we would all know, but in the Psalms, King James did something interesting. Can you tell us what the King James version did with the Psalms?
The King James version was not the same one as Miles Coverdale. It was done by the scholars who did the full King James Bible. But the Coverdale Psalms, were independent and earlier. And there is one thing that I think maybe not in your country, but one thing that's very, very strong in the Christian religion is conservatism. Why mess around with the Psalms that my granny used and my uncle used? Oh, we don't want your modern nonsense. We want the proper. We get that. Perhaps you don't have that in a new country dedicated to the principle that all men are equal. I mean, maybe you don't have that kind of...
We certainly have, we certainly do, to some degree.
Yeah.
But we do have a streak of independence as well.
Yeah. Yes. You still owe us for the tea in Boston Harbor.
If we think about this, when King James was translated, did they use the Coverdale Psalms to some degree?
Well, they might have kept an eye on it, but they
did go fresh.
Yeah, fresh. Yeah.
But King James translation itself wasn't necessarily a translation of the Hebrew all the way through, was it?
It was. Oh, by then it was.
By then it was?
By then it was, yes. Because under the influence of Luther and the Protestant movement, the idea came that anything translated from Hebrew was a proper book of the Old Testament, and anything which was only found in Greek was a bit of a perversion by the Pope and his gang.
Interesting. I know that the King James...
But that doesn't work anymore. That doesn't work because we found... I'll tell you a very nice story. Have I got time? We now know that some of the Greek books in the Apocrypha, the books which were not accepted because they weren't in Hebrew texts have now been found in Qumran, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in the Cairo Geniza. We've got examples of this, and there's a wonderful example. In the book of Maccabees, there's a story that the Greeks who were invading Palestine brought with them elephants, because elephants in a battle in those days were really rather not like a tank is in a modern battle. If you took elephants, okay. So the Greek text says that when the Greeks came into Palestine, they showed the elephants the blood of grapes. That is to say, they apparently took a bottle of Chateau d'Yquem and said, look here, Mr. Elephant, here is a bottle of Chateau d'Yquem. What do you make of that? Oh, it's rubbish, isn't it? But the word show in Greek is dikneumi, and it was translated from a Hebrew word which means to show, but there's a very, very close Hebrew word which means to fill up. So the Greek translation got it wrong. What they did was they filled the elephants with booze and then sent them, because they were drunk, sent them in to fight the enemy, which makes them even more dangerous because...
Yeah.
So there is a little story which shows of a mistranslation, and it shows that the old Protestant principle that only anything in Hebrew is Old Testament was proved false.
Okay.
I rest my case, Your Honor.
Your case is well presented. So here's my question. As you went to try and do the new translation of the Psalms into a modern English vernacular, you used obviously not only Hebrew, but the best and most recent Hebrew manuscripts we have, with the benefit of the scrolls, the benefit of so many other things that Coverdale and King James would never have had anyway.
No.
In the process of that, was there one thing that you could pick that stands out in your mind as a marvelous change that you made? I know you gave us several last night. You may want to use one you gave last night, but there may be another one that you might find interesting.
Oh gosh, I must answer quickly. I think the Kiss one has got a good one.
The Kiss one is a good one.
Yeah.
So that Kiss the Sun.
This is in Psalm 2, where the psalmist is telling foreign kings who are trying to fight Israel and be a nuisance. He's telling them to behave themselves and live in fear of God, of the God of Israel, and his Messiah, his King.
All right, I've got the psalm up here. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and trembling, or serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him.
Yeah. Behave yourselves, you kings of the earth. Stop being a nuisance. Fear the King of Israel, because God's on his side. Kiss, said Coverdale, kiss the Son with a capital S. Now, what would he say kiss the Son for? We just don't know. We're talking 1536. Still quite a strong Catholic influence in the country. Maybe he's thinking of kissing the true cross on Good Friday, some ceremony like that, because he's also thinking of Christ, of course, because this is my son, this day I've begotten you. It is a messianic psalm. It looks forward to Jesus, though he was not involved in smashing people with rods of iron. The coming of Jesus makes a difference. Right. There is a difference in the New Testament. Anyway, so kiss the Son. Why kiss? Well, the word son actually does not mean son in the Hebrew. It's Aramaic. It's not Hebrew at all. We don't know it's Aramaic because we've got the famous bar mitzvah, son of the commandment. When Jewish boys are confirmed, they go through bar mitzvah, son of the commandment. But this word bar, why would, in the verse or two above it says, you're my son, with the proper Hebrew word ben, like Ben Gurion Airport, Ben. It says Ben, so why is this bar there? Then we look at the word kiss, and we find that in Genesis, Pharaoh says to Joseph, you will be over my house, you'll be the ruler of my house, and on your mouth all my people will kiss. Well, we can't really envisage 3 million Egyptians lining up to kiss Joseph on the mouth. It would be very unhealthy, if nothing else. So something's wrong with this word kiss. And the answer is that if we look at the technical look at the Arabic language, we find that nasaka means to put things in order, like pearls on a string, to arrange things symmetrically. So we think that verse now, because of this kind of research, means serve the Lord with fear, show yourselves due reverence, and get yourselves in order. So it solves the problem. The word br on the end, we can explain that because we've got br, and a scribe at about 5:30, he was waiting for the go-home whistle, so he was writing away, and he'd been writing br, so he wrote it once too often.
That's marvelous. We have a few more minutes. Tell us, as you look back at your life, I want you to give us a little bit of life wisdom. Give us some instructions for living that will help us when we leave from this place, based upon your life.
This is, people may not know, but this is the first time I've ever set foot in a Baptist church. Never been before, so thank you very much for greeting me here. I think some people looked at me a bit strangely, that I might be a spy from the Pope or something. But I have enjoyed the warmth of your welcome and so forth. Now, I think there is one thing that I recognize immediately here. There's a lot that's very, very different from anything I have known and loved. But I do notice one thing, and it was encapsulated in your song with Amen in it. Well, I can't. You all know the one I mean.
Glory, honor, and power. Amen. 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 Amen.
That
amen, amen.
was exactly hit me between the eyes. That is what I believe. I believe that we are all made to do one thing, to worship God. That's it. That's what we have to do. And you do it with fascinating popular music. I've been used to doing it with bells and smells and vestments and all sorts of different ways. But the great moment on my side of it is the great Amen. The Amen right back to 200 AD, earlier, 100. The Amen was the center of Christian worship. When the Eucharist is celebrated, do this in remembrance of me, offering thanksgiving for the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, finishes up by everybody has to say the Amen at the end of that prayer. That is the point where we are all united in worship. That's from my side, and I saw it this morning in your very different way of doing it. The same thing. So, hey, brothers and sisters.
And let the people say, amen. Thank you.